From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. It is a game that has always meant more, and in this instance, shows how sticks raised in competition can bring people together and lead to a brighter future. This is a story about the Iroquois Nationals Lacrosse team, one of the top-ranked squads in the world, who were initially excluded from an upcoming competition, and how another team's selfless act of sportsmanship helped bring two nations closer together. If you think about it, every good sports story is an underdog story in some way, and we often hear about sacrifice to succeed in sport. But this story is a bit different. Rex Lyons is a former player and board member of the Iroquois Nationals Lacrosse team. He joins us today to talk about the team, its quest to make the Olympics, and one of the recent trials it faced along the way. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mr. Lyons, I think we should start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about the Iroquois Nationals Lacrosse team?
Sure. We are a national sports organization. Our nation is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that might be better known as the Iroquois Confederacy or Six Nations, depending on what information you're getting. Lacrosse is our sport. We are the originators of the sport, so we have a long history. I guess it's not very well known as to what degree.
I want to get into that, and I want to get this very correct. I believe to the First Nations, lacrosse is more than a sport, sir. It's been said it is medicine given by the Creator. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's part of our cosmology. It's in our creation story, and it's part of our culture, so it's a lot more than just a sport. The sport is one of its many attributes, and it is first and foremost a medicine game, a healing game that was given to us by the Creator in all aspects of it. It's one of the things we have for instruction, and this is how fundamental it is to our culture and our nation, is that when you're a male, you're one of three things. You're either a speaker of the language and you can do the ceremonies, or you're a singer of the songs that help to do the ceremonies, or you're a lacrosse player. So that's how fundamental it is to us. And that's why you may have seen some of the small sticks, we call them crib sticks. So you have a stick in your hand long before you can even walk. And that's how important it is to us and how much reverence we have for the game of lacrosse.
How has this team also helped your fight for recognition of sovereignty?
Well, I think that was part of the inception of the Iroquois Nationals, was to help us implement our sovereignty and use our self-determination in a very high profile and a political profile, where you're standing in the same arenas as a lot of the established world powers, such as the USA, Canada, Australia, England, Japan. It just goes on, where we have an opportunity to stand alongside them with our own flag, with our own national anthem. And we travel on our own passports too, which has been very challenging at times, because you don't ask for permission to be sovereign. You just do it. This has been very challenging for us to use that document, because our nation is both in the U.S. and Canada. So now you have three different entities that have to kind of come to an agreement of the terms and conditions of the passport. That's why we haven't been able to get a barcode. It makes traveling a bit challenging, a bit cumbersome, but we've been able to manage to navigate this very difficult terrain and be very successful in spite of all of these challenges.
I don't want to get into the weeds, because there have been some incidents where, because of that passport, your team's been refused entry, and then thanks to some other political machinations, you've been allowed to play. That's a lot of history, but I do want to actually get to the present and to the current story that I'd like to share. Let's start off with something else. First off, your team is very good.
Yeah, well, it is. It is very good. We have actually arguably the best player in the world right now, which is Lyle Thompson. And it's by all platforms. He plays professionally. He holds scoring records in Division I that I don't think will be touched anytime soon.
And you're ranked third in the world?
Ranked third in the world in the outdoor game and second in the world in the indoor game. And our player pool is probably around, I'd say, give or take 150 players, as opposed to the 500,000 lacrosse players for the U.S. and 250,000 in Canada. So it's pretty remarkable that we're able to deliver a world-class team given the percentages.
You're also a fan favorite. Can you tell me why?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the origins and what we bring to the game. You know, we come from a place of peace, friendship, and healing, and we have such reverence for the game. We're very passionate about it, but we're also very spiritually connected to it. So even though it's a pretty rough and tumble game, we leave everything on the field. You know, and it's always about an exchange of respect, an exchange of understanding, you know, that it's your gifts against another's gifts on that given day, wherever the competition is. And we have high regard for that. And I think that translates to the fans as an underdog, which is clearly what you could call us just because of the percentage and all of the social, the economic, the political challenges. We are a world-class team. And I think that always gains a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of notoriety to be the underdog. And people like to champion that.
What are the World Games? What are they and when are they, sir?
Well, there's a couple different things. Now, we have the World Games is a whole different entity, you know, and it's an international event that has many different sporting events. And in 2021, which was the original date of the Birmingham World Games, the first time men's lacrosse was going to be an actual event. But because of the virus, it got postponed to Birmingham. But you know, this is one of these things. I think it's really a prelude to the Olympics because it's all of these international field events that they have in different parts of the world. And one of our greatest accomplishments that we are also going to be included this year, the next World Games in 2022, to kind of get to the next level, if you will, you know, in our quest to potentially one day be Olympians.
Those World Games, when they were announced, they were going to have lacrosse in it. They invited 8 teams. The Iroquois Nationals were not part of those 8 teams, despite your high ranking in the sport. What happened there?
Well, I think there was a little bit of a disconnect there because partly on the position of the Iroquois Nationals, because as most people would assume, being ranked 3rd in the world, they would think that we're this highly organized organization that's up and running. But really, we've been operating kind of hand to mouth in our spare time. You know, we have a voluntary board that has to field the team with this enormous budget. And as the sport has grown, now you have not only the outdoor, but you have the indoor now, then you have men's and women's, and then you have U19s and on and on and on. So it's just kind of growing exponentially where we haven't been able to keep up with the demand of infrastructure that's needed to really execute. So partly on our side, we want to own some of that disconnect, but on the other side of the coin, where World Lacrosse is involved, I think they also dropped the ball not understanding our importance to be included and what we bring to the game, because I think they were looking at us as a potential hiccup or road bump or liability because of what we would call our sovereign position. And, you know, lacrosse is not a foregone conclusion that it's going to be in the Olympics. And I guess, you know, we're doing everything that we can so that it does eventually get there. But I think we were looking at the glass, I mean, not we, but that the powers that be were looking at the glass half empty rather than half full regarding the Iroquois Nationals. You know, not having an NOC, too, is part of the criteria. So we can see why there was some fear involved, but also there was a blind eye that was in play that we bring a much more to the table than we take away. And to see us as an asset, and we can be a real leg up to getting into Olympics, I believe.
What happened was basically because of the questions over your sovereign status, the World Games decided to invite 8 teams and excluded your team because they didn't want to potentially cause any problems with potentially getting into the Olympics down the line, right? Is that fair to say?
I say that's a fair statement because, you know, the other countries that were invited, they're all recognized as part of the criteria for an IOC. You have to be recognized by the UN as a nation state, and where we have a lot of challenges in that area, and we don't have an NOC, and there's a lot of uncertainty regarding that. So it's fair to say that, yes.
NOC means National Organizing Committee?
Nationalized Olympic Committee. That's the best pathway forward, but there are a lot of pathways forward into the Olympics because all around the world, there's a lot of internal things that happen that kind of don't involve the athlete directly, but leave him kind of in limbo. And then the IOC, which is the International Olympic Committee, tries to facilitate platforms for these athletes. So there are many different pathways in, but we would like to establish an NOC because, you know, that furthers our position as being a sovereign nation.
We'll be right back. this happened, and thanks to the world of social media, and I would also say, I think perhaps to a growing awareness of these issues, including other ones like Black Lives Matter, the word got out, and all of a sudden, you got a little bit of a social media support.
We got more than a little, and it was very, very heartening to see that, because a lot of times we're not high on the radar, so people really don't have the understanding of who we are and some of our challenges, and things really have kind of taken on a life of their own, because, social media happens so fast and has such a vast outreach that we had some real significant global support, which got the attention of the IWGA, which is the International World Games Association, and the World Lacrosse. There was all kinds of support coming for the Iroquois Nationals, which really moved the needle for us in getting us into the World Games.
So what happened next? How'd you get in?
Well, we had a young fella out of Nova Scotia who was a First Nations U19 player, and he found out that we were excluded, so he started this campaign, and we did not facilitate this. This came as much a shock to us as it did to, World Lacrosse and the IWGA that this was happening, and it was getting such traction, So he started this campaign and this petition where he got over 50,000 signatures. So that started to take on a real firestorm, and people were kind of chiming in and saying, hey, this is wrong. And like you said, in today's climate, socially, a lot of people were seeing this as very relative to the topics of today, like you said, Black Lives Matter, and all of these things that are starting to be challenged, such as the Confederate flag, certain statues that represented, at one time in history were revered as heroes and important figures are now revered otherwise. So I think the temperature has changed where they're trying to right the ship, so to speak, and inclusivity is really the goal, and I would say that the mark that's being aimed at.
There's a ton of support. I believe the World Games reached out to, I think, the U.S. and the Canadian federations to make sure they had no problems. They didn't. I believe most of the teams want you there. So they relented, but then the issue is there's no spot.
Right.
Which is an 8-team field. So what happens next?
Well, that was never our intention to have challenged that, other than we were just challenged being excluded, because by all intents and purposes, we earned the right to be there. We were third in the world, and that's part of the criteria. So we were really battling that and never really putting any pressure on the field and looking to have somebody be eliminated. Our suggestion is that you expand the field to 10 teams so that you didn't have that issue. But the things being the way they are, that logistically, it just incurs more cost and a lot more things, that would have to shift. I guess it was not doable. But we kept pushing the issue and saying, well, that's not really our problem. Our problem is, like, why aren't we there? And how did this happen? And who are we going to hold accountable for this was more of our angle. And as this discussion was going on, Ireland took the initiative of just stepping out of the field, making room for the Iroquois Nationals, which is just like, we were overwhelmed. We were beyond words, and it was very, caught us kind of flat-footed, and we had mixed emotions, because that was the last thing we wanted to happen, that anybody would have to be exempt from or have to leave the World Games. That was never our intention. So at the same time, on the other side of that coin, we were very moved and just overwhelmed with respect and gratitude that they took this initiative, just simply because, in the words of their CEO, for Ireland Lacrosse, it was simply the right thing to do.
It was more an organizational decision, pretty much a unanimous yes to vacating our spot, because, we all recognize the brotherhood involved in lacrosse, and we're also grateful for the fact that there's so many people individually as players we probably wouldn't know, and his experiences we wouldn't have shared without the game of lacrosse. And it's a game that we owe to the Iroquois people. So it was just yes all around, really.
And we've had many correspondence between Ireland and our Iroquois Nationals expressing this and developing a bond that has developed because of their generosity and, I would say, big picture understanding, and really the embodiment of the spirit of lacrosse. Our game, they have really, shown this supportive position that really is the embodiment of lacrosse. It's like we all win. And I really believe that action is going to do more for Ireland lacrosse than all the tournaments they might participate in. I mean, I might be overstepping a little bit or overreaching, but I don't think so. Something like that really has a profound ripple effect.
How is your team paying tribute?
Well, one of the things we did immediately is we set up a Zoom meeting, and we wanted to thank them personally. We all also want to express our disappointment that there wasn't another solution, that they could have been included, that it had to go this way. But they were very adamant about saying, it wasn't a very difficult decision for them because they understand lacrosse and they understand and know who we are and really believe that we belong there. So one of the first things we did is we changed all our colors on all our social platforms to green and gold. And that really, ignited some more enthusiasm in the global community of lacrosse and just, sport enthusiasts around the world, where they want to buy the hat where it has our logo, but it's a green hat and it's in the Irish colors. And we think that's a great way to show our appreciation. And we've discussed other things because we were supposed to be in Ireland this past summer for the U19s World Lacrosse Games, but it got postponed because of the virus. And it's been pushed to next summer. And so we might be in Limerick if the things subside and it gets back to some sense of normalcy. We'll be in Limerick, Ireland next year. And we've discussed the possibilities of how we can really expand on this new bond, this new relationship between Ireland and the Iroquois Nationals, which we intend to bring a couple of youth teams, one being from the women and one being from the boys, the girls and boys youth teams. We also talked about the possibility of having the Choctaws come over and have a stick game, which is a 2-stick version of lacrosse. But the Choctaws and the Irish have an old relationship that goes back to the potato famine. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but Ireland was thrilled when we thought that there was a potential possibility. They jumped right on it, so we have to reach out to the Choctaws, and I'm sure they would be very receptive to the idea as well.
Can you tell us about that link? The Choctaw link, the link with the Choctaws and the potato famine.
Oh, yeah. During the potato famine, the Choctaws, they did a little fundraising for them, and back at that time, any kind of money was a lot of money, and they were able to raise some money and get it over to Ireland, which was greatly appreciated and never forgotten. They celebrate that every year. There's a statue. I think it's in Dublin, if I'm not mistaken. I could be a little off on some of my specific details of the history, but I'm aware that Ireland celebrates that every year, and it meant a lot to them during that time. So there was a real relationship that happened there. And in turn, this past year with COVID, Ireland went and did some fundraising and raised some funds for some of the indigenous populations over here, one being Navajo. I don't know who the other nation was, but there was another nation that was involved to receive some of that funding that Ireland did. So there's been this give and take going on between Ireland and indigenous nations for a long time. And I think there's a real, brotherhood, or I would say an understanding, like early in the development of, say, the United States, when things were starting to progress in the metropolitan areas, all of the ironworkers were mostly Native American and Irish and Polish. So there was a connection there as well.
Rex, this has been unbelievably fantastic for us. I love so much about this story. 2 things. What's next? And then is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that we should know?
Well, I guess first things first is that, like I said, we're trying to step up our infrastructure, and we're really gotten to a new place, where we have a youth development program now, and we should have some things in place where we have, I think it's important to mention that, we'll have full-time paid positions now. That is something that we've been working towards, since day one, but it's been extremely hard when you have to field an international team, and it requires a lot of cost that, when you're traveling around the world and moving 26 players plus all of the coaches and staff. That was our main task at hand, but now we've kind of grown to where now we're working on infrastructure to where we might be able to do multi-events and multi-destination things, and now we're working on our NOC, which is a whole nother discussion, and we have a lot of work ahead of us in that regard. But I think this is all good stuff because I want to kind of reflect back on what Ireland's done. They took some initiative, and during this very, I would say, divisive tone that's in play here, that was one of the greatest examples of leadership, and selflessness that is sorely needed in this time that we're all experiencing, with the virus and our political polarization, all of those things. And to have something this significant is extremely powerful and expressive. So I really want to emphasize that. That should be really celebrated. I just appreciate the opportunity to share our story. And I think it's very important to understand now that we have a new relationship between the Iroquois Nationals and World Lacrosse and the World Games, that there's a much better understanding of what we bring to the table, and that the glass is now half full as opposed to half empty. And we have a much better and a much healthier working relationship, which I think is going to serve us both much better. Everyone involved, not just us specifically.
Mr. Lyons, it has been my pleasure and honor to have you on. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again.
Rex Lyons is a former player and board member of the Iroquois Nationals Lacrosse team. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajin Budler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.